Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Today's the Day Changemakers podcast. I am Jody Grunwald. This week, my guest is Susan Slotnick. Susan is a visual artist, choreographer, dancer, writer, and social justice volunteer. Susan had a difficult childhood. As a young child, Susan was labeled a juvenile delinquent, and back then, children who fit that description were issued cards to carry. Susan rebelled, flunked out of school, and befriended people with complicated lives. She did wind up going on one college interview that forever changed her path. Early experiences showed Susan how difficult life was for many, and this instilled something in her to want to help marginalized, forgotten, and disenfranchised individuals. She has helped change the perspective and mindset of countless incarcerated men by allowing them to experience emotions through teaching them modern dance twice a week at a correctional facility in New York State. This was under the Rehabilitation Through the Arts program. Her humanitarian work has been covered and praised by several media outlets. Susan's life's work and dance company, Figures in Flight, has garnered much critical and professional acclaim. Numerous feature articles about her have appeared in dance magazines, and she received the Dance Studio Magazine's Caring Heart Award. She's been celebrated for Women's History Month as Huffington Post's Greatest Woman of the Day and featured in 2 radio documentaries. Susan was also featured in the documentary The Game Changer that won Best Documentary Short at both the Harlem and Cannes film festivals. Susan is also the author of Flight, The Dance of Freedom, a memoir. Please subscribe to the Today's the Day Changemakers YouTube channel. Stream this podcast on all streaming sites. Like us on Facebook and Instagram at Today is the Day Live It. I am the CEO and co-founder of the Zach G. Applauder Kids Foundation, connecting children and young adults ages 7 to 22 who meet the financial needs requirements with ongoing lessons in dance, acting, instrumental music, and vocal instruction. For more information, visit applaudourkids.org. And for more information about Today is the Day and this podcast, visit todayisthedayliveit.com. Have a great week, everyone. The views expressed by all Today is the Day Changemakers podcast guests are their own. Their appearance on the Today is the Day Changemakers podcast does not imply any endorsement of them or any entity that they represent. Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Today's the Day Changemakers podcast. I am Jody Grunwald. And as always, I get to interview the most incredible people who are change makers in the communities in which they serve and beyond. And today I have Susan Slotnick. Hi, Susan. How are you?
I'm okay.
Good. I'm so glad to have you on. Thank you so much for joining me. So I'm going to read your bio as I read every guest's bio because it takes a lot of work to get these words on paper. So for the past 25 years, Susan Slotnick has gone behind the walls at correctional facilities every week to bring the joy of modern dance to incarcerated men and boys. Her choreography dealt with serious themes geared to inspire audiences and students taught social justice activism. Susan is also the author of the book Flight, The Dance of Freedom. The book details Susan's story and takes readers behind the walls of the correctional facilities, providing insight into the correctional environment and what happens when people are given a second chance. Figures in Flight has garnered much critical and professional acclaim. Numerous feature articles about Susan have appeared in dance magazines, and she received the Dance Studios Magazine's Caring Heart Award. She's been celebrated for Women's History Month at Huffington Post's Greatest Woman of the Day and featured in 2 radio documentaries. Susan was also featured in the documentary The Game Changer that won Best Documentary Short at both the Harlem and Cannes film festivals. Wow, Susan, that is a wonderful bio, and congratulations to you for all of your amazing work.
Thank you.
You're welcome. But I want to kind of start, I definitely want to get to the book and I want to get to the film, but I kind of want to go back a little bit in time because when I was reading a little bit more about you and I started to read your book, which is incredible, by the way.
Thank you.
I have to be honest, I haven't finished it yet, but I have to tell you, it definitely keeps you to want to keep reading it. It's wonderful. We are both from New York, which was really kind of nice to read. I'm from Brooklyn. And so why don't you tell everybody a little bit about young Susan and where you came from, where you were brought up, and I want to get into a little bit about your childhood.
Well, I was born in Brooklyn. And as you know from reading the book, my mother was a challenge. She was mentally ill with a borderline personality disorder. My father was an autistic savant. So it was an extremely strange upbringing. And my parents were Depression era parents. So becoming solvent economically and moving upward was certainly on their radar screen, more on my mother's than my father's. My father would have been completely happy to stay in a small room in Brooklyn. But we then managed to go to Forest Hills. After Forest Hills, we went and lived in Scarsdale. After Scarsdale, White Plains. And it was an unhappy childhood for many reasons. Partly it was lots and lots of abuse of women that was still going on before the women's movement. And I was kind of well, I have to say, I was probably an emotionally disturbed child.
Mm.
Yeah, I would have to say that's what I was. I flunked out of school. I got in trouble a lot. I was a card carrying juvenile delinquent in White Plains. They actually issued cards if you got in trouble with the police.
Wow.
Yes,
Yeah.
I wish I still had that card.
Because of all the incredible work you've done, it's amazing where we start, and I say that all the time on this podcast, where we start is not where we finish, or where we end up, or where our path brings us. So, I'm at the part in the book where you talk about moving up, right? And then having you going to a movie with your caretaker and talking to her. She was a Black woman, right? And you're not realizing at this age what that really meant. Can you speak to, especially right now with all that we're dealing with diversity and inclusion and equity? That was, you were even right in there, that was kind of your first, understanding when you went to that movie of what it means, the difference between being Black and being white. Can you share a little bit about that experience?
I'm going to expand a little bit and tell you that I don't remember a time when I didn't want to do social justice work. And I'm talking as a young child. Hold on a sec. Excuse me. My awareness came from that moment where I went to see Imitation of Life with the woman who was our maid who lived with us. And then when I was in junior high school, I really saw a lot of racism starting in the 7th grade. The Black students kept to themselves. They were not allowed to take academic courses. They were told they'd never go to college because of quotas. And they were wonderful. So they didn't have a lot of motivation to do well in school. And when they got to high school, by the way, they were again not able to take academic courses. So I used to hang out with them, and they turned me on to Black culture, which has been with me throughout my entire life. Black music, Black poetry, Black films. Excuse me.
No
The
worries.
loose strife is out here in Ulster County, and it's very allergic. It's the purple stuff. I don't know where you live, but
Yes, I'm having my allergies too at the same time, so I get it.
and then throughout my life, I've just been a one woman, how do I make things better for Black people and for white people connecting to Black people. So I worked very hard to make sure my youth dance companies were integrated. I had to teach for free in a number of places where there was economic hardship because people couldn't pay for dance classes. And I had 4 youth companies, all named Figures in Flight. Actually 5 if you count the prison. Figures in Flight 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And Figures in Flight 2 had 1 more boy than girls. It was 6 boys and 5 girls. And all of the boys were Puerto Rican or Black from this one place that I would teach for free, and brilliant dancers. So at the prison, this is much later, I was the guest speaker for Black History Month because I wrote an article called My Black History where I outlined the whole thing to this date of what my history had been. And some of it was seeing prejudice in places I didn't expect to see it. For example, in Israel, there was a lot of colorism. And so when I finally went to Israel and was at the time very young and very Zionistic minded, it blew my mind how much the darker skinned Jews were persecuted. There was so much prejudice against them. So colorism is kind of global and prejudice is global.
Absolutely. But who knew at a young child, we started talking about you saying you were carrying a juvenile delinquent card. And then we talked about you being a social justice advocate, right? What an incredible, it just wasn't when you were younger, it sounds like, and I could be wrong here, it just doesn't seem like your surroundings were fitting what you and who you wanted to be at that point. But then you grew into this incredible person who wanted to give back and help. And what you saw with your eyes, you saw differently than some of the others did. And you wanted to make a difference. Does that sound about right?
It does, but I think there were two streams maybe that exist in almost everybody. There was a pure stream of wanting to make the world better, which comes also from thousands of years of Jewish liturgy. This is the main thing. My rabbi said to me, if you take all the books, everything ever written, and there's literally hundreds of thousands of volumes, it can be distilled into one sentence. And it's the golden rule. And it's try to leave the world in a better place than you found it. So there was the influence of that, which I think is almost cellular. And then there was the influence of having not been loved by my parents and my desire to heal that in myself by loving others. I will say it kind of works. It works and it doesn't work, because I do think we carry the wounds of our childhood with us forever. But it definitely was a relief. I didn't become a materialistic person like my mother had been, even though she grew up so poor. I kind of get it now. I didn't become a person who was looking to entertain myself. I was on a beeline like my father was, even with his autism, to try and do the right thing every day, to try and do something good every day to help people. And that allowed me, I think, to heal the emotional disturbance of my childhood. I have a grandson who's starting high school today.
Oh, congratulations.
And he reminds me a lot of myself in very good ways, and used to be in some ways that weren't so good. But when I think about who I was in high school, I am amazed at who I became. I flunked every subject, including art, for my entire sophomore year. And what I was told when I had a meeting with my parents, because they had to tell my parents I was not going to ever finish high school, couldn't graduate without the credits. They said I was the only white girl in the history of White Plains High School to ever flunk so many subjects. So there was another piece of racism right in the middle of my failure. What a thing to say.
Wow. Wow. And that obviously all these years later stuck with you, right? Because we don't remember all the sentences that are shared with us and things that are shared with us, but that's something that stuck with you forever. And I just have this question, and it's interesting. I'm reading this book from Brene Brown called The Gifts of Imperfection. And one of the things that is in there, right? And I'm listening to her podcast myself. One of the things she mentions is that the way her parents saw her childhood and the way she saw her childhood were two very different ways. If you were to ask your parents how they saw your childhood, what do you think they would say? I'm just curious.
Well, of course, my mother had a narcissistic personality disorder. So my mother thought she was the greatest person, not only as a mother, but she was a classic narcissist, needing constant reinforcement, constant admiration. So regardless of the subject, my mother would have bragged about herself and considered herself perfect. So that's my mother. So of course she thought she was a great parent, although she did wake up at times and see that she wasn't. And one time, you're probably too young to remember this, but John Bradshaw's Channel 13 series on on family dynamics, my mother got addicted to watching that. And she called me up and she said, I want you to know you were an abused child. And I was like, oh my God, manna from heaven from my mother, who never apologized and never stopped talking and was very difficult. And then fast forward to another of the hundreds of horrific moments in my relationship with her. And I reminded her of that. And here was my mother's illness. And this happened to my children and everybody else. She said, would make this very tense face. She's dead, God bless her now. And of course I've forgiven her. But she'd make this face and she'd go. And she'd only breathe in. She didn't breathe out when she was upset. I used to watch and see, when is the exhalation coming? She would breathe in before, and then she would talk. So she would, I never said that. But she did, and she was right. And I appreciate her recognizing it, if only for a moment. Now, my dad This is a hard story to tell, but I might as well tell it. It's not in my book, and I've never told it on a podcast.
Oh, thanks, Susan.
My father would never have given a thought his whole life to whether he was a good parent. That was an emotional thought, and my father was autistic. So he couldn't relate to anything emotional. I remember when I was 11, I wanted to sleep over at a friend's house, and I needed his permission because my mother was always trying to engage him in the family, even though he was autistic. And I went up to him and I said, I want to sleep at my friend's house. And he couldn't relate to why anybody would do that. He could only relate to how he'd feel sleeping someplace else. He said to me, no, you can't go. You already have a bed here. But when my father was dying, and he was not in any way a good father, he was a great example of a human being with the most perfect values of caring about other people and giving away money anonymously. And he was dignified. So he was dying, and he looked at me on his deathbed and he said, was I a good father? Now, my father hated hypocrisy. That was one of his huge values. Never tell a lie, always be brutally honest. So I stood there for a second looking at my father in that place of near death. And I said, are you going to tell him the truth? Or are you going to tell him he was a good father? And of course, I told him he was a good father.
Yeah, that's really hard.
That was hard, but because he was not. He was not capable of parenting. So, long answer to a short question. And I never got that question before, and I've never told that story on a podcast before about my father or my mother.
Well, thank you for sharing that with me and trusting me with that and our audience. I think that when we do share those types of things, and I know you know this because all the work you do, when you share things, the connection for the people who are listening and watching and part of, it helps those out there. They don't feel alone because there's someone else out there, Susan, with a very similar story somewhere that will listen and be like, wow, it wasn't just me. I had parents like that too. And they'll feel connected to you. And you may even get an email or, down the road from them. You never know. But you let him off the hook because you knew that there was nothing probably at that point. What could you do? What could you say? And forgiveness is important.
Well, you can let them off the hook, but if you've never experienced your anger or your mourning or your sadness, letting them off the hook is a Band-Aid rather than real healing.
Yes.
But you do not have to be angry or sad to them directly. You just have to deal with it on your own and not shove it down. Does that make sense to you?
Oh my gosh, it makes perfect sense. You can't, because you can't, if you go numb to it, it comes back again. It's just like grief, when you're grieving someone too, because you're grieving that relationship that you wish you had, that you didn't have, that you wanted. And the thing is, I think, as a parent myself, and you're a parent too, like we make mistakes. We don't always know what we're doing is incorrect. We do the best that we can with what we're given and the tools that we're given. And then we hope for the best. And it may not be the best for our child. And like I said, sometimes our perspective is different than the perspective of the child. Right?
It's true. Absolutely.
Awesome. So when you were not, I just want to go back now a little bit too, is that, so when you knew, okay, you're not going to graduate high school, what did you think you were going to do? What are you going to do now?
Well, by the time I was in high school, I had found out what my great power and my great strength was and what I could do to get the biggest reaction. And it was attracting men and boys.
Yeah.
Because I didn't have anything else going. And I was very, very good at that. And I got a tremendous amount of attention for it. And of course, in those days, we thought that made us powerful as young women. And we thought that meant we could manipulate men and get them to do what we wanted. And to some degree, it was true. There were boys that I didn't like particularly, and they would give me gifts and they would call me up and they would offer to drive me places. So it was a little bit delusional. But since I had flunked out of high school, I had decided that what I was going to do, I was already a painter. There's one of my huge abstracts right behind
I
me.
was going to ask you if those are your beautiful works of art because
Yeah, there's like oh my gosh, I've just put stuff in a gallery yesterday. I still have about 50 paintings here. But anyway, so before I lose the thread of what the question was about, oh yeah, I felt like I was going to move to Europe and I was going to have many interesting affairs with artistic men and become a kept woman from somebody and be a painter and have somebody sponsor me. That was my plan when I flunked out of high school.
wow. Okay. So that was the grand plan, but what actually happened?
Well, what actually happened was, and this is a very strange story and it would take much too long to explain it, but if you read my book, you'll get it. My mother interceded in my life in a very obnoxious way, but the results were great. She arranged my marriage, my mother, with a man that I didn't think I was in love with. And it turned out to be great. When I had infertility problems, my mother told me to go on a water fast. And after that, and she had gone on, she had been involved in fasting. After that, I had 2 more children when I was told I'd never have any more children. So my mother actually stepped in spite of herself and how destructive she was. And all I can tell you is God worked through my mother, for lack of a better expression. So she didn't want me to go to France. She wanted me to go to college. And I said, I have no transcript, no recommendations. How am I going to go to college? And she said, you're going to really do well in college because it's very different from high school. So I had a cousin who was teaching at Bogan City Junior College in Chicago in 1967. And he said that I could live with my father's sister, Aunt Anna, in Chicago. By the way, Aunt Anna made pills. They weren't illegal pills. Drugstores in those days, they'd give her the powder and she'd have the capsules. And what she did to get extra money was she'd sit in the basement with this big vat of powder and she would make capsules all day and deliver them to the drugstore. So that was my experience in Chicago. But I went, and sure enough, I took earth science, and I don't remember what else I took because I really liked earth science. And I did okay. I got C's, which for me was like A's. So then I came home to prepare to go to France and fulfill my dream. And my mother said to me, and this is a great story, it's in my book. She said, just apply to one college. Just apply to one college. And if you don't get in, go to France. And she said, I want you to go to a nice woman's teacher's college. Well, at this time, I was a hippie by this time. I had gone from a juvenile delinquent to a hippie, and I was outrageous and irreverent. And I said, all right. So she wanted me to apply to New Paltz, where I live now.
Mhm.
And at that time, there weren't so many people. They still had in-person interviews. So I went for my interview. I was wearing a low-cut tie-dye shirt, and I had combat boots that came up to my knees. And I didn't want to go to college. So when I was interviewed, I put my feet on the desk of the interviewer, and he said, put your feet down. He couldn't believe it with these big combat boots, because I was, trying to be like I thought hippies were supposed to act, be always iconoclasts of everything.
Right.
And he said to me, why do you want to go to New Paltz College? And I said, I don't. My mother's forcing me. And he said, well, we might as well talk anyway, because I have to sit here and I don't have another interview for another hour. And we talked the whole time. He took a bottle of wine out of his desk. He toasted me and he said, I don't know what it is about you. This always makes me cry because I think he was the first person to see this in me. He said, I don't know what it is about you, but you have potential beyond what you could possibly understand. You'll never get into New Paltz College. It's hard to get in. You have just this, you didn't graduate from high school, except I got a high school equivalency diploma eventually, is what it was called in those days. and there was no GED. And he said, you have these 2 college courses. You got C in one, C minus in the other. You're not getting here, but try to educate yourself. And we had a great time, and he just saw something in me. So I came home, and 2 weeks later, a letter arrived from New Paltz College. I threw it in the garbage unopened. And once again, my crazy mother, I heard her scream from downstairs. She opened it. She said, "You've been accepted."
Oh my gosh, you gave me chills.
It gave me chills. It gives me chills every time I tell this story.
Oh my gosh. Susan.
Yeah. And then I got a new wardrobe. My mother was very into wardrobes, and I bought my little, fish tackle. I had something you carry fish tackle in. It had all these gouache paints. And I arrived there, and I went to find the man who pulled strings to completely change my life in 1 hour. And he was gone. He had taken another job, and they would not give me his information. So there were times later in my life I'd see the men dancing in prison, or I'd see a piece of choreography that I did, and I would think to myself, I didn't do this alone. It's me and the interviewer.
Yeah.
It's me and the interviewer for everything I've ever done that was good.
See, all you really need, and that's what I say, I've said this on other podcast episodes, all you really need is one person to believe in you.
Oh, yeah.
Because that could change your life. One sentence, 1 hour, 1 minute, one word. It doesn't matter. It's just that feeling of connection, which I feel like is in every part of our life, is we need to feel connected in our work, in our family, with people. So that's an incredible story that changed your entire life. And your art is amazing, but I want to get into, so you graduated from New Paltz? Did you graduate from New Paltz?
I graduated from New Paltz. It's a little murky how it happened, but it's in the book. And I graduated with a 2.25. I have math anxiety, so I actually got a psychiatrist note to not have to take the one math class. It was waived for me, or I would have never graduated. And, it was laissez-faire in New Paltz. It was nothing like my mother thought. First of all, it was not a girls' school. It had the second largest in the 60s drug traffic, second to Berkeley only. There were lunatics and hippies in the street, and people running around on bicycles in gorilla costumes, and the professors were having relationships with all the students, and the students were having relationships with their professors. It was a free-for-all in the 60s. I mean, there was one time we emptied out the art building because it was snowing, and nobody had to go to class for the entire day because we were making a big snow sculpture in the yard. It was a great, I didn't learn very much about art, by the way, in college. I learned a little bit about other things, but I didn't learn a lot about art because there wasn't a lot of real teaching going on. It was just like
party.
It was like a hippie circus.
It sounds like a big part. Oh my goodness.
It was fun though. It was a great time, great generation.
I'm sure. But then you left there to pursue, where did you do study? Obviously artwork, but I do want to also get to how you wound up working in prisons with men and doing the incredible work you have been doing for 25 years to help them find their way. So when you left there, where did you go to work?
Okay, well, that's a great story, but I got to get up and move my back a little bit.
No, I know you hurt your back. So for
okay,
those
just
watching,
give me a second just to march around for 1 second.
You got it.
Oh, it's not so bad. Not so bad. Well, you're asking questions that are requiring me to almost tell the story of my life. So my mother found this husband for me. And that's a great story, and it's very, very funny. And she found him because she said, quote unquote, he was the only decent Jewish boy who ever showed an interest in me. And she kind of forced me into marrying him. It's in the book. I can't explain it. It'll take too long. She threatened me, and if I didn't get engaged, she wasn't going to pay for college. It's a whole involved thing. So anyway, when I graduated, through serendipitous events and strange occurrences, I married the man my mother picked. And she wanted me to become like him. He went to Penn State and studied business, and he was not a hippie, and he was very conservative, but he got to be just like me. He sold his car, got a motorcycle, grew a beard, started to smoke pot, which I'm not recommending, because in that time we thought this was never going to lead to any other drugs, and it sure as hell did. So I'm not pushing that. But it was the 60s. That's what people did. And then he told me his big dream that was a secret, because it was not the way his parents would have wanted. He wanted to go around the world. He wanted to travel around the world. And he had said to me at one point, would you go with me around the world? We're going to take a year to do that. Or I think we wound up doing it for 7 months. And right after I got out of college, I got on a Yugoslavian freighter and wound up in Tangiers and never changed directions, and went all over the world with him, from country to country to country. I just wrote about my experience in Afghanistan.
Wow, that's incredible. Susan, it's just truly incredible. And I do encourage everybody to read your book, and we'll give out that information at the end, but it's on Amazon. It is, I'm reading it. I'm in the midst of reading it. And that's how I know some of the things that I want you to share, because I'm like, they're incredible. But I think it's just, again, I want to highlight that where you came from. We started with this whole juvenile delinquent piece, and how incredible your story is. So for those who feel stuck or unsure of where their life is heading, it's believing that, things are possible, because I'm sure you didn't as a child believe that all the things you've accomplished to date were possible.
I didn't believe that as a child, but I can tell you that after flunking out of high school, I skipped a part. I spent a year going to Rhodes Preparatory High School at night in New York City in order to get my high school equivalency diploma, or even my cousin wouldn't have been able to register me for any classes, even at Bogan City Junior College.
Right.
And I would, at that time, again, the world was so different. I would travel from White Plains by myself to my high school at night. And at 10 o'clock at night, I would walk from the Rhodes Preparatory High School, which is on West 54th Street, all the way to Grand Central Station to catch a train to White Plains. And every single night I would stand at the railing of Rockefeller Center, and they played Rachmaninoff's Second Piano Concerto or Rachmaninoff's theme on Paganini, two magnificent classical pieces. And I would do something that I realized was almost like meditation. I would listen to the music and I would make promises to my future children. I won't ever do this. I will never hit you. I will share with you the books that I secretly read in high school while I was flunking out, because I had this very secret intellectual life in high school that had nothing to do with high school, but I was reading volumes of books. I was memorizing A.E. Housman's entire poetry book, A Shropshire Lad, while flunking out of high school. So I wanted to expose my children to all of this, not because their lives were so dark and impoverished emotionally, but because they were going to be raised in richness and find these things not through impoverishment, but through abundance. And I remember standing at that railing every night. And now I look back at it and I realize it was a meditation. And then I'd get on the bus. But before I went down there, I would go and sit in the White Plains train station. There was a Kinney rent-a-car place. I don't think they even have that anymore. And I would go 3 hours early to talk to the black man who ran the Kinney rent-a-car place. And he would play music for me and teach me about Black culture. And then I'd get on the train to go to Knight High School. I can't believe these stories myself.
But they're incredible. It's so incredible. And no wonder you have a book and a documentary out about your life. I think they're just a beautiful sentiment to all that you've been through and all those people you help, because him sharing that with someone who's interested had to be wonderful for him too, to have somebody to talk to for 3 hours about his life.
It eventually had a darker motive.
Oh, I'm sorry. Drift. Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's just, it had a darker motive eventually.
Well, sorry to hear that, but it sounded like it started with a very innocent motive at the beginning.
Well, it was certainly innocent on my side.
Right, right.
And not that I'm taking this lightly, but it was such a different world then in relationship to sexual politics and men and women. And I was flirting with him for 3 hours also before each. And I was already 18. So, it was a different world than it is now.
So how did you come to dance? How did dance come about in your life?
Well, I danced from the moment I was born. I was dancing in every home movie. I was winning dance contests, Lindy contests when I was 11. I always danced, but I went to an incredible ballet school, Ballet Russe de Monte Carlo, in the same building, by the way, as where my night high school was 10 years later. I know these things are just out of all the buildings in New York, I was in the same building. But I was a terrible student because I was emotionally disturbed. So every time the teacher turned her back, I stopped working at the bar. I'd lean on the bar and stop. And then I became extremely boy crazy since I saw that was a great power that I had. So I thought, and I quit ballet because I was interested in other things, but I always danced. Dance was always an essential part of my life. And the story of my rape experience, which is in the book, after that happened to me, I put on music and I danced all night in my pajamas until in the morning I was able to move on from that experience.
I read
So
that.
dance was always a healing art for me, basically. Always. It was always a chance to circumvent trauma and do something beautiful, I guess.
What made you bring it to incarcerated men?
Well, from that experience of dancing all night after the rape, which was a date rape, by the way, with somebody that I voluntarily got into a car with and somebody who was my age, I had this sense of freedom, and I had this thought, as you said, thank you for that quote. Oh no, it wasn't you. It was a different podcast. Excuse me. I am a senior.
Busy lady.
I am a senior. Everything starts with a thought is one of the things that was quoted by the last podcast that I was on.
Yeah.
Everything amazing, awesome, big, gigantic that happens with a thought in someone's mind.
Right.
How amazing is that? So I thought, where do people need to feel free and have the healing that dance can bring? And I had always had dance companies with more boys than men, youth companies. And when we would tour, because we toured, they were professional youth companies. I had one company with 11 boys and 5 girls. So for some reason, whether it was something in my personality or the ballistic movement from the Horton technique, because mostly what I taught was Lester Horton technique, it appealed to men. And I worked so well with the boys that when I wanted to go into a prison, I picked a boys' prison. And that's how it all started. And I was 5 years in the boys' prison every week, sometimes more than once a week. They used to laugh because I would come on Christmas Day, which was not a day that was very interesting for them in prison. And they'd say, Miss Susan, it's Christmas. Why are you here? And I'd say, well, it's not Christmas for me because I'm Jewish. So after that, they always expected me for 5 years on Christmas and on Easter. And they always had me there on Christmas and Easter. So we would make something festive happen. I'd teach the whole class on Christmas to Christmas music, Black Christmas music. And so that went on, but that's how it started.
I do want to go back because I think it's really important for those listening. And if there's any women out there who have dealt with rape, I just think it's really important to acknowledge that, now it is important to make sure that you get the help you need. I mean, back then it was important too, but it wasn't as, I hate to say it, and I didn't live in that era, and you did, so you can explain it better than me, but I don't feel like there was as much support if those things happened, and date rape and all of those kinds of things. And not all of that was reported. And like you said, you danced all night. It's not like you went to the police to tell them this is what happened to me.
In every single of the 6 sexual assaults that I experienced in my life, there was zero help. Zero help. And it never even crossed my mind to get help, because in every instance, what I looked at was my own culpability. And as difficult as this is for young women to hear, none of it was my fault. Men should never, under any circumstances, violently attack a woman or take advantage of her like a doctor did with me in an emergency room in front of people. That's in the book too. However, in my last dance company, I would say to the girls, I'd say, you don't go outside and stand in the middle of the road in traffic. You protect yourself. You don't go to New Year's Eve to Times Square and wave $100 bill around in the air. No one should take your $100 bill. No one should run you over, even if you're in the street. But there's been a backlash that's gone so to an extreme that women still need to know men are dangerous, and certain situations with young men are dangerous, like alcohol. And you still have a modicum of responsibility to protect yourself. No responsibility in it if somebody hurts you. That's on them 100%. But don't put yourself in a situation where you can be hurt, because trauma lasts in your body for a very, very long time. And you have to be a little bit careful, because this is not utopia. And young boys are driven by whatever it is they're driven by in situations, and men. And what we're seeing is older men don't get it. Older men like Governor Cuomo, he simply doesn't get it. He has no idea what the problem was, because when he was young, if he came on to someone he worked for him, that person might feel that it was a compliment. My boss though thinks I'm attractive. So the world has changed drastically, and I'm happy about that. I still believe if we wouldn't run in traffic or wave around money in a crowd, we still have to take some responsibility for keeping ourselves safe.
Yeah, safety is very important. And I'm so sorry that you had 6 incidents that happened to you. And thank you for sharing that. And, for those who are listening, I think it's important to know, they're not alone. And, from happening in business to it happening in a doctor's office to it happening anywhere, it's all about knowing about being safe and taking care of ourselves. So thank you for sharing that.
And it's all about knowing that if you're beautiful and young and feisty and you like romance and you like the game, there's nothing wrong with that. That's okay to be like that, and to wear beautiful clothes and to feel attractive. There's nothing wrong with that. Just keep yourself out of situations where you could become powerless. That's really my only.
Oh, that was so well put, Susan, by the way. That is so true, because there is nothing wrong with buying beautiful clothes and feeling beautiful.
And feeling sexy. There's nothing wrong with feeling sexy.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I agree with you 100%. So I think that's a great message. There is nothing wrong with that. After that, actions from other people, that's their problem, not ours.
Yeah.
And I totally agree with that. So I really want the audience to understand the impact you had by going into the prisons. And if there's a story or if there's something that you could share that really showcases, because I did get to watch a little bit of your documentary.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah, which is incredible. And on the website, Susan, what's the website? Do you know it offhand?
It's susanslotnick.com. So it's really easy.
That is so simple. And
yes,
you could find the documentary right on the website.
Yep.
Wonderful. And also just to see the guys that you've impacted and to hear them share what the experience of dance has brought to them was so wonderful before the podcast, right? Because you just don't know. You love hearing from the people that you've impacted, and I got to see that. So what can you share with our audience so they really understand the impact of what dance has given?
Okay, I'm going to tell you my favorite story out of the hundreds. And it is whenever I get a speaking engagement, which of course since COVID I haven't had, although I welcome them if anybody has that opportunity for me. This is the story that I always tell. His name is David Navarro. He went to prison as a teenager, like many, many, I would say almost maybe the majority of people in America, very young, almost all of them between the ages of 16 and 25 before their brains are fully developed. He was illiterate. He was a victim of every kind of abuse imaginable, including sexual abuse. I don't know too much about his family, but I do know that he didn't really go to school in a consistent way. He came to the dance program, the men's dance program in Woodburn Correctional, and he fell in love with a dance that I choreographed from Alvin Ailey's Revelations, the first movement from I've Been Buked. And the picture on the book, ta-da, the picture on my book is the beginning of it, the plie section of I've Been Buked. And he's right in the front. And his story, his whole story is in there. So he fell in love with that piece. We did hip hop, we did all kinds of things, but that was the piece he loved. Anyway, at one point I walk into the class, he's no longer there. The men tell me that he's been diagnosed with stage 4 stomach cancer, which he got from water in another facility. The water had something called a pyorrhea. I don't know, it's some kind of virus. And everybody was treated but him because he had no symptoms. So that virus in his body for 10 years later caused him to get stomach cancer. And he did not want to die in prison. And he had a girlfriend who stuck with him the whole time, who knew him as a child. They were like childhood sweethearts in the beginning of high school. Her name is Tina, and there's letters that she wrote me that are in the book. And he went to something called, I guess it's parole for people who are dying. It's like mercy parole, sort of. And they turned him down. He had already been in prison 28 years. And at the performance, his final performance, he talked about the man he killed. And he talked about him. He said, Mr., I forget what the last name was, Mr. Johnson. And I'm so sorry. And he was amazing. And he spoke before the performance. And then he got into the apex of I've Been Buked because he was always in the front. Anyway, eventually he came back to Woodburn. And he came back into the dance performance. He was much weaker. He was much thinner. And he said, am I going to have a chance to dance I've Been Buked one more time? And I said, yes, you are. So he got up and danced. And interestingly enough, another amazing coincidence, there was a woman who had gotten permission to take pictures of the dance class because there was a young man there who was making a radio documentary, the second radio documentary. Although he did something exploitive, it's in the book. I don't like him. Because he lied to me about something because I was protecting the men and he went for beeline for the story.
Oh.
Ugh. Anyway, good news, bad news. I strong-armed this woman to taking a video. She was not allowed to take video, but her camera, like all of our cameras, had a video, place where you could take video. After he got turned down from the mercy parole and was told he was going to die in prison, I found 3 lawyers and I sent them the video of him dancing I've Been Buked. They never got back to me. Excuse me, allergies. Very lovely. She wipes her nose on her sleeve. Okay, people, we're all human. So I sent these lawyers the video because it would have cost tens of thousands of dollars for him to object to do what he would have to do to get it reversed, to get the parole problem reversed.
Right.
They never got back to me. I got a letter from his girlfriend, his lifelong girlfriend. It's in my book. She says, a miracle has happened. They saw the video. The next day, they all went to the prison and took his case pro bono.
Oh my God.
These are the things that happen. They're all, and by the time he had the second parole hearing, he was already in hospice in the prison. And they paroled him. And then on a Tuesday morning, my phone rings and I hear traffic and I hear a window open and someone's in a car and it's David. And he says, I'm calling you because you got me out of prison and dance got me out of prison.
Susan.
He died a few weeks later. I was with him the day before he died. I went down there. He was sleeping and not sleeping. I met Tina for the first time, although we'd had a lot of communication. And it wasn't very dramatic. When we said goodbye like we were going to see each other again. And by the time my assistant, who assisted me in the prison for years, Bethany Wutam, she went down to see him the following day. And by that time, he was no longer awake.
Oh, wow.
And
Wow.
but he died a free man, and it was because of prison.
It was because, yeah, from the dance, from what he did with the dance. Wow. Incredible what you've done for these men. And yes, they didn't start out on the right foot, but they needed somebody to believe in them too, to know that not everything defines them forever. I mean, what he did was terrible, but what you did to help him, people, unfortunately, we are, what is it called? Victims of our circumstances at times, and we don't know his story of growing up, and what he did was terrible, taking another man's life, but you gave him an opportunity to turn his thought process around, and he realized what he had done was incorrect.
Well, one thing I learned from working with the prisoners for so many years is there's two things that are both true. There's mitigating circumstances that they all have of how they wound up in prison or how they wound up violent or killing somebody. And then there's, in some ways, the myth of personal responsibility. But without 100% personal responsibility, the world would be in chaos. So for the men who got out, and they were very brilliant, a lot of them graduated from college that were in my program, because to volunteer to dance in prison, I didn't rehabilitate anybody. They were already rehabilitated, or they wouldn't be dancing in front of 200 men a piece like I've been buked. So they were on the top tier intellectually and emotionally, and the biggest wish for themselves. So I think that what finally happened was that I set before them some tools, but they did 100% of the work rehabilitating them for the final chapter or whatever it was in dance. So I never felt like I was doing it. I felt like talented Susan, with her manipulation skills and her wisdom and her experience and her being very good at choreography and extremely good at working with men and extremely good at working with Black men, because we used so much Black culture. I brought in tools that were sharp, but they are 100% responsible for using them. I didn't save anybody. I gave them a chance to save themselves.
You did. You were the catalyst for
Yep.
sure. For sure. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of that. I want to ask you the last question I ask everybody, all of my guests, because this is something I'm trying to do, is write a book about all the answers, which I think is incredible, because everybody says,
Oh, what a great idea. And I don't even know the question yet.
yeah, exactly. And the question is, if you knew then what you know now, what would that be? What would you tell younger Susan?
It's a difficult question for me to answer, but I would say, younger Susan, let me just think for a moment.
Think for a minute, and it could be more than one thing, by the way. A couple of things might come to you.
Do not commit the sin of lost hope. No matter what the world is saying to you about who you are, no matter how sad or lonely you can be as a child, always stand by the railing in your own way at Rockefeller Center and know that you have great hope for your life ahead.
You're making me cry, Susan. Oh my
I'm making myself cry.
Oh my God, it really making me cry. Wow. And just so the audience knows, you had no idea I was going to ask you that question, because you haven't really watched all of my podcasts. So it's really awesome to get such an answer that's just authentic and real, and just, that was your answer. And yeah, the sin, you said the sin of lost hope.
Can I just tell you one last thing?
Absolutely.
So I found my diary from when I was 12 years old with a little cartoon picture in front of it. And it's filled with boy craziness and fights with my mother and loneliness and misery. And then it gets to one entry and it says, my mother hates me. I'm flunking everything in school. I have no friends. Why do I believe in myself so much? I have that in writing from my diary when I was 13.
Wow. So beautiful. So beautiful.
And my column that I just wrote, that's going to be published today, is called I Hope. And it's about what I wish for the Afghanistan refugees coming here.
Yeah.
That's kind of an aside, so you don't have to put that in the podcast. I'm sure you'll end it at a great moment.
No. Well, I actually do want to ask you something else, even though I said that was the last question.
Okay, go ahead.
There is something else. And the work. So how do they find I Hope? So that's the one thing. Where would they be able to find that article? You know,
there will be a link to, the paper just changed. You know what? I'm going to send you the link.
Okay, send me
Is
the
that
link.
okay? You
Yeah.
send me an email.
Yep.
And, sometimes they usually put my column online, but if they don't, I'll just send you the column and the picture that goes with it.
Perfect.
And I'm going to show you, where is this? I'm going to show you the happiest painting that I've done in the last.
Oh, I want to see.
Okay.
See.
Big abstract. And it's very, very pink and very elegant. And it's like a dance.
It is like a dance. That's what I was thinking.
The colors are getting kind of washed out, but it's very, very nice. I just finished it yesterday.
Oh my gosh.
It's still wet.
It really.
I can't hear you till I put the ear.
Yeah, I know.
What do you say?
I'm saying it really is like a dance. It's so funny you said that. When I looked, I felt like there were figures dancing.
Yeah, it's very lots of movement.
I
just had a granddaughter.
Congratulations.
Yeah, Eden Leilani Stone, her name is, and she's about, I think she's not even 2 months.
Wow! Oh my God, my
And
mother's name is Stone.
And I'm very girl. I had 3 daughters, so I was excited to get a granddaughter because I have 2 grandsons. And so I put a lot of pink in the picture, hoping my daughter will want to put it in her room someday.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Wow.
A lot of paintings online too. All kinds of things. Choreography, paintings, a lot of publicity is online.
Yes. So what is next for Susan?
Well, that's an interesting question because I don't know. Everything stopped. Between COVID and my age, I'm not in the prisons and I can't go back to the prisons because I published my book during COVID. And once you publish a book and write about them, you can't work in the prisons anymore, which is not a bad rule. People are, especially progressive people, they have almost as much prejudices and extremes of thinking as the other side. Well, there's a lot of good people who work in prison. There are a lot of good corrections officers. There's a lot of good prison administrators that care about the men. I met them. And the rule that you can't write about them comes from the fact that there's a lot of people that would go in for that purpose, to exploit them in some way to make money off their stories. So once the book was published, I was no longer going to volunteer. So what's next for me? This is really what's next for me. And it's going to take time. Given the life that I've led, who am I without all that? Who am I not a painter? Who am I not a social justice person? Who am I not a mother of children living at home? Who am I as not a choreographer? Who am I as not young and beautiful? Who am I with all those trappings that life covers up our real selves with sometimes? That's the question I'm working with. That's my future, getting that answer and being absolutely fine with it.
That's beautiful. I always say that. We put armor. No, you're fine. We put armor on with our titles and those things, those layers, and we get so connected to that becomes who we are and are doing. Then we have to do the work like you're doing, to find out, wait a minute, who are we under that, right? I don't have kids at home anymore. This is the first year at my, empty nest now for me. And
wow, that's huge. Did you cry your eyes out when the last one left?
I did, but also I have to say, because she took her freshman year of college from home due to COVID,
Oh,
also time for her to take flight.
right, right.
Now,
And when the
so-
first one left, isn't that a gut punch?
oh, that one was
Oh my God. I kept walking around thinking to myself, my daughter's alive. Why am I feeling this sense of dread? And I mean, it was so frightening.
It was
And now,
grief. It
yeah,
was a grief.
it's really grief.
It was totally grief. And I would go in her room and it would, all out of her stuff was gone. And I would just feel this emptiness. And that was awful. But then now the second one, after seeing her having to, miss out on the experience last year and take college from home, I kind of actually
But
celebrated.
also the last one.
Yeah.
And then you're involved in career building, obviously, with this podcast.
So Susan, thank you so much for being a part of the podcast. I'm so happy to have you. And thank you for sharing your incredible story with us. And I hope you'll come on again and give us an update as to what you're doing and all that you found out after you uncover all those layers of what you thought made you up, because we know that you're in there and under all of that. And I just want to say what I always say at the end of every single podcast: today is the day. You cannot go back to yesterday, and you do not yet own tomorrow. So what small goal or large are you going to take or step for yourself to get yourself closer to that goal? Thank you so much to Susan for sharing your story, and have a great week, everyone.